Welcome to the 16th episode of When Life Hands You Lemons. This week's episode, I have a conversation with the talented Miss Jazmine Valencia. And Jazmine is the president and CEO of JV Agency, which is a digital marketing agency and music agency based in New York City and Los Angeles. She focuses on artist marketing and culture building with her approach, and she also has worked with artists like The Killers, Fall Out Boy, Avicii, American authors, and Shawn Mendes, among others. She is widely recognized not only for her business and creative acumen, but also for her down-to-earth attitude and motivational approach with her team and the artists she's working with. Her ultimate mission is to bridge cultural and geographic divides between makers and users. By doing this, she uses technology as a catalyst for this positive change while also leveraging a vast reach to give a platform for those to connect. Now, a few weeks ago, I had one of JV's agency's colleagues, or one of Jazmine Valencia's colleagues, her employee, Miss Melanie Rogoff, who clearly has a passion for music publicity and is doing her dream job by working at the JV agency. And Miss Jazmine talks a little bit about how to work with big clients, how to build a strong network, as it's very important to have a strong network and connections within this kind of industry, especially if you're working with these high-end clients and wanting to secure these big deals. These types of things are absolutely necessary for you to succeed. Now, not only is a very important network and connections important, but having kind of a business mindset and knowing how to approach these connections is also very important. Jazmine talks a little bit about what not to do when you're reaching out and trying to connect with these other industry professionals, and I have discussed them in previous episodes as well, because Jazmine has a similar approach to me, like not reaching out multiple times on different platforms. And we talk a little bit about that later in the episode. But Jazmine also tells us a little bit about how working with sponsorships has really grown her business. For example, she was working with a band, and then they partnered with a traveling company or a suitcase company because the band is traveling all the time. It kind of made sense. And having sponsorships and partnerships that make sense is also very important to ensure success. So before we jump in, I want to remind you to sign up for my mailing list, as this helps me notify you when new episodes like this are live. Additionally, my Patreon will also be in the show notes below, and the money that I make through Patreon will be put directly back into the show. And there are also some pretty cool perks, and I'm also working on other perks as well. So if there's something you would like me to provide through Patreon, please let me know, and I would love to incorporate that in. Additionally, I would appreciate a 5-star rating and or review on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcasting platform that you listen to your podcasts on, as it greatly helps me grow the show and have it be discovered by other listeners such as yourself. And lastly, there is a guest request form in the show notes as well. So if you or somebody you know would be a good guest on the show, please send them this link or fill it out, and I will definitely reach out to you if you are a good fit for the show. And we will set something up so we can have a conversation for you to be on the show. So without further ado and all of that mumbo jumbo out of the way, I hope that you enjoy my conversation with the president and CEO of JV Agency, Miss Jazmine Valencia. First of all, I want to say thank you for being on the show. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to talk to me and have a good conversation about the music business and public relations and how you got kind of started. So thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Thank you. So why don't you just kind of start by telling us a little bit about who you are and how you got started within the music business?
Yeah, so I've been in the music industry now for over 10 years, and I currently run my marketing company. It's a boutique firm that we handle marketing for a variety of artists of all genres and all sizes. I got started by interning, actually. I started as an intern at the Island FGM Music Group, and at the time, the department was called New Media, which is now the department known as Digital Marketing. And I started basically by running MySpace pages for artists. So I was the person running Mariah Carey's and Rihanna's and The Killers and a bunch of other artists. And that's how I got into it. And when I graduated school, I moved to New York and started working at Island FGM in the same department. And I stayed there, and I started as an intern and worked my way up to the department, the head of the department. And when I left a few years ago, I was the head of the department, and I left to start my company, JV Agency, which is what I do now.
Cool. So the roles have kind of changed just a little bit since you kind of left the company into what you do now.
Yeah, so I mean, it's essentially online marketing for musicians, which is what I was doing there. I was doing there at the label. I was doing like specific different, like at the time when I started, it was MySpace, and then it became Facebook, and then Twitter, and then Instagram, and then Snapchat, and whatnot. And then now I do it on a grander scale.
Cool. So I know I spoke with one of your colleagues, Miss Melanie Rogoff, last week, and she had a great conversation with me, and she talked a little bit about music publicity and how important it is and building connections and all this stuff. But you are the owner of the company. So I want to talk to you a little bit about how starting this kind of business in today's industry is more difficult or even more easy than it was, say, 5-10 years ago. Do you think it's easier to run like a digital marketing agency, and why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think it's definitely easier. The reason being is because there are a lot more opportunities. 10 years ago, as an artist, you kind of were tied to the label and the lanes they wanted to take, if you will, with your career. Today, with anybody being able to access the internet, we have so many options, and an artist has so many more different ways of making income and revenue under music, and their art is not just like, oh, I'm signed to the label and, I'm getting the advance and that's how I make a living. Now with the internet, which is what I love doing, is finding new ways of getting revenue for the artist and just being really creative with the marketing we're able to do. Sometimes when you're with a label, which was the case 10 years ago, you needed to have them in, you kind of had a checklist of things, if you will, to market your project. Now you can still do the checklist things, but you can do so much more with the internet and the technology that we have today. So I think it's easier.
Cool. So you talked a little bit about like the revenue streams and things like that for musicians. Now, getting a little bit away from the royalties, because that's kind of assumed and everything kind of standard. Like, of course, musicians are going to get royalties, but what are some of the other revenue streams for musicians outside of just getting like TV placements and things like that? What are some kind of creative ways that artists can make money aside from the royalties?
Yeah, what we've had a lot of success with is building up artists' social media, and they get income from their actual social media posts. So it's finding a way that it's connecting with a brand where it seems organic. For example, a band that's on tour, if they're on tour, they're going to be on the road, they're going to have their clothes in a suitcase. So we reached out to a suitcase company. I won't say the name here, but it's very popular among millennials. And we did a campaign where they sponsored a post on the band's social media to promote the suitcase. So that was an extra source of income for the band that, maybe 5 years ago that wouldn't have existed. And it was a good amount of it's a big check for doing something that they were naturally doing anyway. So that's one way.
Right. That's really cool, because a lot of artists and musicians think that it's just playing music and then releasing it on SoundCloud, Spotify, and then sitting back and then maybe collecting some of the royalties and payments from touring and on the Spotify streams and Apple Music streams and whatever streaming service. But partnering with and sponsoring, having a different company sponsor different artists and musicians is really cool as well. So you said you saw a lot of success with that, correct?
Yeah, yes, we've been seeing a lot of success with that lately in the past couple of years, where we reach out to brands that make sense for the artist, where it's organic, where they're already using the product or they really like it and they want to use it, or things like that we know it makes a good fit. And a brand is happy to hear that an artist and a creative is passionate about the product already, so it's a nice synergy between the two of them.
Yeah, that seems beneficial for both ends. Now, a lot of people think that just posting on social media could say like, oh, I make money from Facebook. A lot of people are like, well, how? There's not really a lot of ways to make money from Facebook. So is there a way to kind of make a Facebook post and then you get, say, X amount of dollars from it? Or is it when you say I'm making money through Facebook or Twitter, it's through sponsorships like that?
So it can be both. I would say the bigger dollars are through sponsorships, and the sponsorships that we do is not just like a one-time post and then that's it. They're more long-term sponsorships where it's a beneficial relationship for both sides, not just one picture and then we're done. It's just more, throughout a campaign, either for the brand or for the artist, as long as it makes sense. And then by posting like on Facebook or on Twitter, there are ways to make money that way, as long as you're engaging with your audience, because that's what people like. A brand would want to see, that the engagement is there and that you're influential to your audience. So that's why it's so important to have good social media these days. Like, of course, everybody wants to see the big numbers, but if you can make extra income out of it, then that's even better. So you're not just solely relying on Spotify streams or, a revenue from a tour.
Right. And can you talk a little bit about how like engagement with these posts is more important than say how many say followers you have on a page? Like, for example, you might have 100,000 followers on Facebook, but you may make a Facebook post and only get 100 people to even look at it or comment on it.
Yeah, and that's often the case for a lot of artists, because a lot of artists are only active on their socials when they have something to promote. The good artists that are good at social media are constantly engaging with their fans, no matter if they're promoting a single, an album, or they're off cycle and they're just, it's their time off from being on the road. So the way to do it, to have a higher engagement, is to keep that consistent engagement throughout, not just when you have something to promote, because that's when you lose people's attention. If you're only coming to me when you have something to sell or something to stream, it's a two-way conversation with social media. It's not just you as an artist being like, hey, go download this, go buy my tickets, go buy my merch. That's when people have like a lot of followers but very little engagement, because they're only communicating when they want something out of the audience, as opposed to having a constant relationship with them. So I think that's key for having a consistent engagement on all your posts.
That's a good point, because I see a lot of artists actually I don't see their pages on Facebook or posts on Twitter unless they're sharing like, hey, download my new song, or hey, share my new EP, or whatever. The artists that I'm engaging with and enjoying following are those that are sharing pictures of their dogs, or they're interacting with their fans, or they're doing giveaways and all kinds of different things. Are interacting with their fans. I prefer to engage with those people rather than those that just say, hey, promote my EP or retweet or download or whatever it may be. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, because it's very important.
Exactly. It's super important, and I think a lot of artists forget about that, that it's not just about the one time that you need the fans to go listen and stream or download or whatever the case may be. It's an ongoing relationship, because they follow you, and I do it as a fan myself too. I follow an artist because I want to get to know them as a person, and that's the beauty of social media, that you can do that. We have access to musicians basically 24/7. 10 years ago and going further back, the only time you would find out what was going on with a musician is if they were on the news or on TV or on a radio show. You would have to kind of wait for those moments to know what was going on with them. And now with social media, it's 2 seconds. I can Google what's going on, and I'm sure I'll find a story under Instagram or Snapchat or something. So that's like what keeps fans coming back and following those artists. And I tell the artists that I work with too, when we do their social media, some are like, oh, well, I don't feel like I need to share every moment. I don't think people need to know what I'm eating for breakfast every day. And that's probably true. People don't need to know what you're eating for breakfast every day. But it's about finding the balance of like sharing enough so your audience can feel like they know you and they can support you. But also having that privacy of like, not everybody needs to know your breakfast.
Right. Because I have family and friends that I have even unfriended or unfollowed because that's all they share is what they're eating for breakfast or what they're having for dinner. I don't really care if you're having bean soup or a burger tonight. It's really none of my business. But for an artist, it's a little bit different because it's kind of like, oh, that's like, I feel like artists are kind of unique. Like they're like, oh, I listen to their music. I've heard their music played in the stores and when I'm shopping, or I listen to them when I'm working out or whatever it may be. So it's like, that's what they're eating. That's what they like to do on their free time.
Yeah. And I think as an artist, it's important to have that level of people are looking up to you. So it's more of like being that guidance that like, oh, if they are eating this for breakfast or for dinner, it's more of like, if the fan likes it, it's because they want to feel and be connected to you. And that's when it makes sense to do it, when there's that connection, but not like oversharing it where it's just like to like a obnoxious way. So there's definitely the balance, and that's why we do it, like to find the balance for each artist, because each artist is so different.
Absolutely. It has to fit their personality. And like if you have an artist that's very quiet and humble in person, you absolutely wouldn't want to push them to be like extroverted and really not who they are online, because it has to resemble their social media presence to online, correct?
Correct. It has to be genuine how they are as a person in real life outside of their phone. So yeah, it has to be 100% genuine. So you can't force it. And we've worked with artists that are, they don't want anything to do with social media because they don't get it and they're shy, or they're just good behind a piano. So we work with them to figure out a way to get their personality and show that in social media by staying authentic.
Cool. So I want to come back to the sponsorships a little bit. Could you go in depth a little bit more about how you would go about something like that, or how you would get something started and how you would maintain that, and how to say maintain multiple sponsorships at the same time? Is that a good idea? How can an artist who's kind of looking for that next step or that new revenue stream kind of start into getting into sponsorships?
Sure. So the sponsorships we do are mostly through social media. So the way to get started is following brands that you are genuinely using already or really like already. Like if you drive, a Toyota Prius anyway, and that's like the only car you drive and that's your preference and you've driven it for as long as you want, that's authentic, but not like, oh, I'm just going to start driving a Ferrari because I want to work with Ferrari, so it's finding the authentic brands that stay true to who you are. You like them already, you use them already, you probably already follow them because you like them, and you're pretty well versed on what the brand is about and what they stand for and what they do. So that would be step one, like knowing those brands, and then coming up with a compelling partnership with them. Just because you like to drive a Toyota Prius doesn't mean that they're going to give you a free car, because a lot of people like driving it, right? It has to be beneficial for both parties. So coming up with something that would make sense for them as well as for you. And then once you have that plan and you can formulate some sort of proposal that makes sense for the brand and will make sense for you, then it's just a matter of reaching out. And with the beauty of the internet, we can pretty much email anybody and get a hold of someone that can put you in touch with the right person that you need to talk to. So that's how I would go about starting it. as far as several sponsors at the same time, that can work as long as they're not competing. So I wouldn't do like two alcohol brands. I wouldn't do like a vodka and a tequila because they're probably competing with each other. But you can do alcohol brand and then a clothing line, or things like that, where it makes sense and they would go hand in hand.
Okay, cool. That makes a lot of sense to me, anyways. So thanks for sharing that. That's kind of cool because I'm working with a couple artists myself, and these are always good ideas to continue thinking about like the next revenue stream, because in such a digital age, there's so many different things we can do to create revenue, like artists writing an ebook, for example, and posting it on Amazon, or sponsorships, or who knows what. There's always something out there that you can make money on.
Yeah, definitely. And the beauty of working with musicians is that everybody can relate to music one way or another. And everybody has different tastes, but good music is good music at the end of the day. So you'll find something for everybody. And with internet, you can find that audience. So it's also showing the brands, if that's the case, like, look, this is the audience that I have. They also fit your brand. We have the same demographic. Let's do something together. So it's about finding that common ground.
Excellent. So when you're doing these sponsorships and partnerships with these different brands, do you see more success or less success on certain platforms? Like, for example, if you're running like a clothing line, would you do push more for like Instagram posts or Facebook or something more visual, or how does that kind of work?
It depends on the artist and the outlets and the size that they have. So for a clothing line, it would probably make more sense on Instagram because it's more visual. But on YouTube, it can work as well if we have a video that we're shooting and we use the clothes in the video, and then we make sure to tag it and all the appropriate things once the video is released. So it really depends, and also depends on the demographic of the brand. If it's on an older age, we tend to go to Facebook. So there's different variables as to know which platform to go with.
And you said the demographic makes a lot of sense, like, for example, Facebook, and then I'm assuming like Instagram and Snapchat would be more for like the younger, like maybe 15 to 20-year-olds, 22-year-olds. And then
Exactly.
Facebook is like 25 to what, 35, 40-year-olds?
Yeah, even a little bit older than that on Facebook. Yeah, yeah. And then we also have YouTube, which is a huge source for sponsorships with like incorporating brands into music videos.
Yeah, YouTube has really kind of upped its game with like making it easier for content creators to like embed partnerships and sponsorships within their videos. Have you seen that kind of persuade and move into musicians and videos and stuff?
Yeah, exactly, because they make it super simple to work with a brand and being able to highlight the product when needed. So yeah, so YouTube has been a great tool for that.
So when you're working with different artists, like say for example, you've worked with artists like Avicii, The Killers, Shawn Mendes, and then I'm sure you work with a lot of very smaller artists, independent artists as well. So what are some of the things that you see differently that say the major artists, the bigger artists like Shawn Mendes do versus the independent artists that can maybe learn from them, but they don't really see kind of the back end things of how everything works?
Sure. I think the main thing is that people often think the success happens overnight and they forget that it doesn't. So a lot of the smaller artists are more anxious, like, oh, I haven't seen, it's been a small growth in the past 2 months on my streams on Spotify, or my socials aren't, I don't have a million followers yet, things like that. But I think the smaller artists forget it takes time to get there. It's not going to happen overnight. And also, an artist like a Shawn Mendes or anybody of that size, they have a large team and they have a record label that's paying for everything. So it does make things a lot different. So the biggest difference I think is that the smaller artists forget that they need to be a little patient. I think the artists on the major labels, they know it takes the time and they know everybody is working towards the same goal, but they don't they don't have the same like what's the word? They don't have the same urgency in the sense of like, oh, how come this isn't happening yet? You know, and the smaller artists, they tend to have that a lot.
How long does it or can it take for, say, an artist that is quite small to get to, say, Shawn Mendes level? Does it take a year? Does it take 3 years? Does it take 6 months? You know, what is that timeline? I mean, I know it varies greatly amongst the artist and the genre and the, target market, but generally, how long does it take, and kind of what is the process to get to that point?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of variables, so it'd be hard to give you, an exact timeline. When Shawn started, he had already been added for a few. When he started with the major labels, he already been added on his own for a while, where he built an audience on, on Vine himself, and then that was able to be translated into more. So it does take quite some time. Some artists are working for years before anything happens. Like the artist Empire of the Sun, they released a song and it was out there for a very long time before anybody paid any attention. So there's so many variables, so it's hard to say. One thing that I will give advice to anybody listening is that, like, don't give up, because the minute you give up, somebody else is going to take your spot, and that you've been working hard at. So if being a musician and, making it and being in the mainstream is what you want, like, you can't just give up because something doesn't go right, or right away, like how you wanted, so it's just the timeline definitely varies. You can get lucky and, be featured in a commercial that's going to blow you up, or you can get put on TV, on a TV show and like like a Tonight Show kind of thing, and then that can take you to the next level. So there's so many factors that you can't really put a real timeline on it.
Right. And that's kind of what I figured. And there's so many different factors that, like you said, come into play. So there are a lot of artists that, in my experience and what the industry is kind of leaning to, a lot of artists are moving away from major labels. They're kind of going more the independent route, and they would rather just kind of stay independent or even start their own label and kind of just grow from there. But let's say there's an artist that wants to make it big, but they don't want to be in the spotlight. Or they don't want to be like mainstream, quote unquote. What are some of the steps they can take to get big without being mainstream?
Yeah, and there are a lot of artists that now are not mainstream, but they're big and they have a following, and they can go on tour and sell out, big venues, and people will show up to see them and buy their merch, and they can make a successful living that way. So it's about finding what do you want to be. If you want to be a band that, for example, that can tour and make a living off touring, 8 months out of the year, then that's what you really need to focus on, is hitting every venue, making sure everybody knows the band is coming to whatever town, and you hit it over and over again until you build that fan base in that city. If you want to be a songwriter because you don't like maybe sing it in public, but you're a really good songwriter, then is building your craft as a songwriter and getting as many songs out there as possible. If you do want to perform, but you don't want to be like touring as your main source of income. Okay, what is going to be your main source of income if it's not touring? Is it going to be through sponsorships? Is it going to be through there's so many different factors to do that as well. But there's ways to do it where you don't need the label, and you can still have a fan base and still make a living out of being a musician.
Do you think artists should all be using social media, regardless of how big or small they should be? And if they're kind of a smaller artist, but they don't want to make it mainstream, should they use social media, and why?
Yeah, I think they should be using social media because it's just another tool to reach a new audience. So if right now they're only using, for example, word of mouth, they might be missing out on getting their music to new people. So having the tools that social media can offer, literally at the tip of your fingers, like it's just at a free, for the most part, tool that you can use to get your music heard. And you never know, you might catch the attention of somebody that can really make a difference for you. That's happened so many times where somebody's just either on Spotify going through like random playlists, and then next thing you know, the song gets shared and it becomes viral, and then all of a sudden they have 1 million plays on their song, and they're getting revenue from the 1 million plays, and then they're getting added to more playlists, and it just kind of snowballs after that. So, it's like, why not use a free tool that's accessible?
Right. And I've always thought like musicians could also, instead of being, because there's a lot of musicians that like to remain very personal. They don't like to share their craft on or with their audience. But I think it would be a really great tool to say hit kind of another market of, say, the producer side or the artist side or the even songwriting side of their fan base, of say, hey, here's how I get creative, or here's what I do on Sundays. I sit down and I play guitar for an hour and I just write out melodies, or I'm, composing different chord progressions and things like that. I think that they could really hit and strike a new chord with an audience by sharing those types of things on social media.
Exactly. Like it's such a discovery tool, not only for, if you're a musician, not only for your music, but also for other things you like to do. And you never know what you might get out of it. Whether it's advancing your career or something else that can benefit you down the line. So it's always a good resource for just getting out there, you as a person, but also your craft.
Right. And I now that's a really good point. I want to transition a little bit into more of the business side. And so I'm a journalist outside of everything else. I write at some of the big publications like electronic music, EDM.com and Noise Porn and Earmilk and Magnetic Magazine. I've contributed to them for about a year or 2 years now. And I've stressed the importance in previous episodes and with previous guests, the importance of building relationships and strong relationships with industry contacts. Can you kind of elaborate on that and what networking means to you, especially in the position that you are in, being a CEO and the owner of a company, and then B, being like a music publicist, building relationships with these big brands to ensure the success of sponsorships with the musicians that you're promoting and representing?
Yeah, networking is key for being in the music industry. That is like probably the number one thing you want to be involved in, is networking. So for me, I get told, and people call me like a connector, because I'm always connecting people. If I meet you and I think you would benefit from meeting somebody else, I connect the two of you. And, that's what networking is all about. And for me, I wouldn't be able to do what I do if I wasn't networking all the time, whether that's with the sponsorships that we do, or with the marketing opportunities that we do, or just in my business in general. Is just about making connections with others and with the artists themselves. When I first started, the reason I was able to start is because I had clients, artists that I had known for a long time, and it was a natural progression. So like reputation and networking is everything. And in order to like succeed, you need to be able to network with other people and just be open to what may come out of it. Sometimes people are, maybe shy, or they're afraid to reach out to somebody, but unless you try, you'll never know. So I think networking is everything in the music industry.
Absolutely. And I can absolutely certainly attest to that, because a lot of the opportunities, actually 80 or 90% of the opportunities that I've been provided with have actually been through people that I've networked with or have recommended me to, or vice versa. It's never been I've sent in my resume, I've gotten a phone call, and here's the job. That's not really how the music industry works, and it's very stressful at many times. But at the same time, it stresses the importance of knowing somebody. Like, for example, like if I have an artist that would be like, "Oh, you and Jazz should connect," and I would connect you two to do business and work things out, because I know you could benefit her, the artist, and vice versa. So, what are some of the opportunities or networking gigs that you've done that have benefited you in the past to kind of grow your business and your network?
Yeah, what I've done for me personally is I speak at a lot of conferences. I speak at panels and master classes, and that has really helped not only professionally to get new clients, but just to meet other people who are maybe not necessarily just in the music industry, but just in marketing in general. And that has meeting, going to a marketing conference that is not only music industry focused, you're meeting other companies, and that I've been able to use for sponsorships, right? Because maybe there was the chief marketing officer for a soft drink or things like that. So I do a lot of that, and definitely social media. I'm constantly on social media, meeting new people, looking at profiles and reaching out, and just like if somebody posts something interesting, I reach out to them and say like, oh, that I really resonated with that, whatever the case might be, and start building relationships that way. And I have a lot of good friends that I've met through social media, like long time ago, a lot of years ago, that we met just randomly messaging each other, and now we're really good friends. So those are definitely my two most useful tools.
I've done some of the social media things as well. Like I've become good friends with some people. Just I've never met them because they live in completely different states, but just because I messaged them like, hey, I really like the article you wrote, or hey, I really like the song you released. And then we start a conversation there. We start chatting, and we actually have more in common than what we don't. We have similar interests because we're in a similar industry. So we're all kind of working for the same goal, and that's to see each other succeed in a very difficult industry. So I'm sure that there are people that are trying to connect with you, and there are people that are always trying to connect with me because they want me to write about their song or their EP or their next campaign or whatever the case may be. What are some of the things that kind of turn you away from that person or connecting with that person? Or there's some things that you just kind of like, red flag, or like for me, it's sending me Facebook messages and then sending me 3 more emails and then reaching out on Twitter. And that's kind of a big no-no for me. So what are some of those no-nos for you?
Yeah, I would agree with you on the same one.
Yeah.
I've definitely had those where it's like an email and then a DM on Instagram, and then they tweet me, and then a message on Facebook. They literally find every avenue possible to contact me, and it's like that's way too much. Mm-hmm. So that's definitely one. I think when reaching out to somebody, just in general, like you have to know your boundaries, and you have to be professional about it. Some people are not professional about it, where they are literally contacting you in every possible way they can find, and that's just not being professional. It's one thing to send out one email, and then maybe if you don't hear in a few days, do a polite follow-up, like that's fine, because I get a ton of emails, and sometimes I might see one and might forget to respond because I moved on to the next thing, or something more urgent came about. So I think it's the no-nos are definitely, don't be unprofessional. Like, this is still a business, so reach out to somebody in a professional manner. I think that's the biggest one for me. And like that happens all the time, where they, I have a contact info on our website, so they'll submit it there, but then they'll also DM my JV agency Instagram page, and then they'll find my personal one and DM me there. And it's just like a never-ending loop of trying to contact me, and it's like that was very unnecessary.
Right, it was, because I have my own website, and I have a contact page on there, and right above the contact page, I said, if you are a publicist looking to pitch to me, please email me at this. And it still astounds me when I receive pitches through that contact form. I've gotten to a point where I don't even read them. I just get deleted. Because right. It says it right there, like you didn't even read, you weren't courteous enough to read what it says, to please contact me through here.
Yeah, and I think that somebody reaching out, they should do their research and know their audience, and that's what a lot of people don't tend to do. Like sometimes I get emails for things that have nothing to do with what I do, and I'm like, you clearly didn't read what you were, like who you were contacting, because this doesn't even apply to me. So that's another one. Like, please do your research before reaching out.
Right, and that's something that I've had issues with. Is I have people pitching me music all the time, and there's sometimes where artists will pitch me or publicists will pitch me like rap music or country music or folk music. It's like I don't listen to any of that music. I write at publications that focus on electronic music. So if you would have done some research, you would clearly see on even like my Twitter page, which is public, I share a lot of electronic music. You can see the articles that I write and some of the stuff that I talk about on the publications I write for that none of it is country. None of it is really hip hop because I don't listen to those types of genres. So that comes down to a really good point is do your research before you're reaching out and pitching to these people.
Yeah, I know that's definitely so important because not only are they wasting their time, but they're wasting your time by not doing the research. So
Exactly. And so, what are some of the ways that you do research to find out how people are interested in a partnership, or maybe there's somebody that you would be connected with that would maybe benefit an artist or a client that you're working with? What are some of the research methods that you use?
the easiest and like first thing that I do is I just do good old Google search, and that can kind of tell me, if somebody has their Instagram private, obviously they don't want somebody to contact them that they don't know. So don't go and request them, that people do that a lot. And it's like, it's private for a reason. Same with Twitter, if that's the case. But yeah, it's doing the research, Googling, and then, there might be a LinkedIn, looking at the website, like your website, most often they have like instructions for contacting, it's very clear saying, if you need this, make sure to do this. So that's really what I do. And that's how I find it. And then, if it's somebody like, for example, on LinkedIn that we have a mutual connection, I take the time to reach out to the mutual connection and ask, because they might be able to offer some insight and they can be like, oh yeah, that's the right person for what you're looking for, or you're way off. Like it's an old, LinkedIn that they haven't updated. So don't even bother, things like that. So if you do have a mutual connection that can help, that's where networking and reputation comes in, where the mutual connection can vouch for you and introduce you if it makes sense of, what you're looking to do.
Right. So your company is based on public relations, correct?
Yeah.
That's kind of what the entire agency and the company does, is public relations. And you've talked a lot about how relationships are important. How can somebody start these relationships? I know you touched about this, or we touched a little bit about this earlier, and like what not to do, but what are some of the things you can kind of start building that relationship to move it into like professional endeavors? I know you had mentioned like if an Instagram is private, don't add them to then DM them and pitch to them, because chances are you're going to get blocked right away. So what are some of the ways that you do, or what are some of the ways that can be done to start building that relationship with other industry professionals?
Sure. If it depends on kind of what you're looking to gain. But for example, if you're looking for a mentor, in the industry, is looking for somebody who has accomplished something that you want to accomplish in the future. And a simple email, it's very easy to figure out what an email is based on the company they worked at. So a simple email expressing that, they admire the person and they would, understand that they're busy. But if they have, 10 minutes for a quick chat, that would be greatly appreciated. And more often than not, you'd be surprised, people do respond, and they were like, oh, you want to meet, or you want to just jump on a quick call. Sure. So that's a good way to start. If you want to keep it more professional, there's LinkedIn, which is you can message the person without having to add them as a friend, and it's up to them once they receive the message if they want to communicate back. But it's also easier because they can look at your LinkedIn profile and see your accomplishments and what you're kind of about. So that's a good way that is still professional. LinkedIn is a social network, but and obviously it's tailored to work and being professional. So that's a good way to start. Going to the person's website, that's and doing the contact form. That's still not crossing the line, because that's a public. The contact form that is there for a reason. So that's still within the lines of not crossing that line and what not to do. So those are good ways to start. Going to networking events, that's what they're there for you to meet other people in the industry, for you to grow and get to know other peers. Going to really any events of the same interest, because then if you want to be a photographer in the music industry, go to shows and meet the other photographers that are already there photographing people, things like that. It's just about finding those things that the persons that you want to be like, or you're aspiring to be, are already doing, and finding a way to connect with them.
Excellent. So once you've connected with these people and you're starting to build relationships, how do you maintain the catalog of all these different people and remember who's working where and what they're doing and why you even reached out to begin with?
I think, that is going to come organically if the person's a good fit for you to have that relationship with, where, it's not necessarily, you don't have to keep a notebook or a journal of like, this person works here and they do this. If you have a genuine relationship with them, you're going to continue to talk to them and admire their work, and hopefully your relationship grows where, if they do have a private Instagram, they'll just automatically follow you, and then you can keep up that way, or whatever social media might be, and if they're having an event, they'll invite you, and that way you can keep up with what they're up to and grow that relationship.
Sweet. So when you're reaching out and starting to connect with these people or even these big companies, like you had said, you can go to a networking event and sometimes like the chief marketing officer for a soda company might be there. Do you have different reach out methods or different points of contact or ways of reaching out and connecting? So for example, if you were to connect with the chief marketing officer at a soda company, would your approach be different than say the suitcase company or another big promoter or an alcohol company?
Yeah, absolutely. The approach definitely needs to be tailored to your audience. So it goes the same to me when reaching out to somebody as it's for an artist talking to their audience. You wanna know how to speak to them so they understand you, and it's easy. You always want to make it easy on them. So I know the CMO of a soft drink company is super busy, right? They have a crazy schedule. I'm not gonna all of a sudden start texting them like, at midnight, where I might do that with a club promoter. I'm gonna email the CMO during business hours. So you gotta find, what works for the person you're reaching out to or you're connecting with, what works for them, and make it easy on them to say yes.
Always make it easy for the person you're reaching out to, whether that be like sacrificing something that maybe you might have to say, for example, like a club promoter might be more available during the evening hours, like when they're putting on a show. So you might have to make a sacrifice of, do I want to go to bed 2 hours early tonight, or should I stay up to make this connection?
Right, exactly right. Yeah, and you have, because you want the person you're reaching out to say yes to whatever you're looking for. So you have to make it easy on them to say yes. If I'm texting the club promoter at 7 a.m., I know he probably just got home from work at 5 a.m., so he's sleeping. He's not looking at my text. And if he does, he's probably going to say, no, I'm trying to sleep, get away, So you got to make it easy as possible for them to say yes. And whether it's adjusting my sleep schedule or adjusting the form of communication, or whether I have to drive a little further to go to an event so I can meet the CMO, whatever the case might be, you always want to make it easier for the person.
And have you ever had that where you've had to greatly kind of change your schedule or your typical reach out or networking tactics to kind of fit something to meet with somebody really big that could potentially really grow your business or a client, and then it kind of ultimately not turn out the way you had anticipated it to?
Sure, yeah, and I've had it turn out even better than I had hoped. So it's worked both ways. One time I had 30 minutes to get to the airport to catch somebody before they got on a 20-hour flight. So it was like I had to drop everything I was doing and head to the airport and meet them there. And we had a meeting right before the security entrance, you know? So it's like, what do you got to do type of thing. And, you know, sometimes it goes great and it works better than you anticipated, and sometimes not necessarily, but that's, you know, that's the chances we take in life. But I think people see, I like to use the word failure and change it to lessons. So I don't see those as like failures. I see those as lessons. You know, from anything that goes wrong, you kind of learn and you can fix it for the next time. So, you know, adjusting what you're doing to achieve a goal is something that everybody should do.
Right. You kind of answered my next question, which was when you have those moments of, oh, shoot, this didn't turn out the way I had anticipated, or that meeting did not go nearly as well as I had hoped it to go. How do you kind of deal with those, failures or lessons now to kind of change them into something positive, or what are you learning from those types of things?
Yeah, so the reason I like to use the word lessons instead of failures is because lessons is more of a positive word, where you can take something that didn't turn out the way you wanted and do learn from it. You know, what you learn from it is going to vary on the situation, but one thing that I always like to say is that you never know unless you try. So, you know, had I not gone to the airport and, you know, dropped everything I was doing, that deal wouldn't have gone through. So I had to try it and see if it worked. I could have missed them and he could have gotten on the plane for the next 20 hours and then I would have lost the deal. But I gave it a try and it worked out. You know, and then other times where it hasn't worked out, okay, you look back at the situation and what could I have done differently, so you know the next time to do that differently. So that's kind of what you learn, and those are the lessons that you have to like review the situation and see, okay, this is where I went wrong, I should have done this instead of this, now I know for next time. And it's just about you know, taking responsibility for the wrongdoing and just, okay, I know what happened, and now next time it's not going to happen because now I'm aware of it.
Sweet. So I think that's kind of a good point to kind of close out this episode, is how to turn failures into lessons instead of failures, such a negative word. So how, first of all, lastly, I kind of want to thank you for taking the time to be on the show again. And I want to ask you, how can people keep up with you, your company, your business, and kind of what you're doing? And how can people follow up with you should they have a question on something you had maybe said during the show?
Sure. Yeah, they can definitely reach me on my website, which is jv.agency. They can use the contact form and reach out to us that way. And you know, we're on Instagram as well, JV Agency, and then my personal Instagram is @DJJazzy, which I do check and I answer.
So thanks again so much for your time, Jazmine. I really appreciate it. We had a great conversation. I learned a lot from you about sponsorships and turning failures into lessons.
Thank you. This was fun.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of When Life Hands You Lemons. I very much hope that you enjoyed my conversation with the talented Jazmine Valencia. I really enjoyed her conversation and her information on how to reach out to sponsors and potentially building those sponsorships, because it's kind of a unique thing. It's something prior to connecting with her I wasn't really aware of, and I wasn't really thinking of things like that. So she kind of gave me some good ideas to potentially reach out, and hopefully she gave you some good ideas as well. And as Jazmine had mentioned, all of her social media information and contact information will be in the show notes below. So if you'd like to reach out to her and connect with her and what she's doing, or potentially even work with her, her information will be in the show notes below. So please connect with her and ask any questions you may have about something she had maybe said. Lastly, I just want to remind you again to please subscribe to my mailing list, as this helps me notify you when new episodes are live, as well as share some music industry tips and tricks and even motivational things, because as you work in the music industry, life happens and we all need some motivation to get through life's crazy adventures as well. There's also a link to Patreon, which helps me grow the show, and with some unique perks via tiers and whatnot, you can connect with me and even work with me by supporting me on Patreon. So, and the money that I make through Patreon goes directly back into the podcast so I can make it better for all of you. Additionally, I would really appreciate a 5-star rating and or review in Apple Podcasts or whatever platform you choose to listen to your podcasts in, as it greatly helps me grow the show and help it be discovered by new listeners such as yourself. So that would really mean the world to me. Lastly, there is a guest request form, so if you or somebody you know would be a good guest for the show, please fill it out or send it over to your friend and have them. I will get into contact with them for them to be on the show, and we will set something up if they are a good fit. So thanks again for tuning in to this week's episode of When Life Hands You Lemons, and I will see you next week on the show When Life Hands You Lemons. 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 Hands you lemons.